It was the summer of '89. Yeah, that's the song, right? Bryan Adams, Summer of '89. Classic tune. Hello, everyone. My name is Mike, and this is The Bored Cyborg. Welcome back to yet another episode. A few months back, I did a video on my top 10 films from 1988, which was the year I was born, and I figured I'd keep it going and do my favorite films from 1989. 88, 87 to 95 is a very nostalgic time for me. It's my video rental store days, so I have a lot of fond memories. And of course, in the early 90s, when I was 4 or 5 going to the video rental store, a lot of the movies on the shelves were from the 80s. And the late 80s, more particularly. So I watched a lot of movies in my younger days that came out in the late 80s. So I have a lot to talk about, so let's dig right into my honorable mentions. I have 5, and then we're going to get right into the top 10 from 1989. I'd love to know what your top 10 films from 1989 are, so feel free to leave those in the comments below. Leave a couple honorable mentions as well if you can't help yourself like I can't. And I'd love to get a discussion going to see what some of your favorites are from 1989. First honorable mention, a very nostalgic film for me, is Weekend at Bernie's. I grew up watching this film and loving its macabre nature. Watching it as an adult, it is quite disturbing at points. But basically it's about a guy who dies in the very beginning of the film, and these two schmucks have to pretend like he hasn't died. So they're puppeteering him, marionetting him around the beach and making him dance. It's phenomenal. It's so funny. It's ridiculous. I grew up watching it, love it, and I love its sequel. That is Weekend at Bernie's. My next honorable mention is Meet the Feebles. Now, it has been a long time since I've seen this. I've been wanting to upgrade this crappy DVD to a Blu-ray, if it exists. And this is Peter Jackson's first directorial film. And it stars all puppets. And they're foul-mouthed, and they kill each other. It's violent, it has sex, it has cursing. It's awesome. It's like the Muppets on crack. So if that interests you, check out Meet the Feebles. It's great. Next up is from 1989. Don't say that anymore. Warlock. I love Warlock. I think Warlock is such an underrated film, directed by Steve Miner, who did, early on in the 80s, he did a couple Friday the 13th movies, 2 and 3. Julian Sands as the Warlock is phenomenal. He's the reason to watch these films, sort of like how Andrew Divoff is the reason to watch the Wishmaster films. Julian Sands is fantastic in this. This film is actually pretty gory at points, pretty brutal violence at a couple points, which always surprises me watching this. It's just a fun action, fantasy, horror, adventure film with some great performances, especially Julian Sands as the fucking Warlock. It's awesome. Check it out. Next up, almost said from 1989 again, Bride of Reanimator, a sequel to one of my favorite films of all time, one of my favorite horror movies of all time, The Reanimator from 1985. This one is directed by Brian Yuzna, not Stuart Gordon. But damn, Yuzna does a great job with this follow-up. Such an underrated sequel. Such a great sequel that really expands on the mythology of the Doctor, Dr. Herbert West, played by Jeffrey Combs, in such a remarkable performance. He is such a horror icon, and he doesn't get enough love. Was that trying to tell me something about Herbert West or something? I love this movie. I love Herbert West. Bride of Reanimator. My last honorable mention, another film I'm super nostalgic for. That is Ghostbusters 2. I grew up watching both films, love both to death. As an adult, I do recognize that 1 is a masterpiece, 2 is not quite a masterpiece, but I still love it. I think it's still one of the best, horror, science fiction, fantasy comedies of the late 80s. And I have so many fond memories of it. The scene where Oscar gets taken from the windowsill, it scarred me as a kid, and it still bothers me to this day. For obvious reasons, you watch it at 4 or 5, 6 years old, you can imagine how that affects a child. So, Ghostbusters 2 is my final honorable mention. Alright, so getting into my top 10 films from 1989, number 10 is an underrated, criminally underrated anime film. It's an underrated action sci-fi film from '89, directed by Yoshikazu Yasuhiko. It is Venus Wars. This movie is such a cool animated film from the late 80s that nobody really talks about. It's got some phenomenal mech design. It's got great characters, great voice acting. Even the English voice acting track isn't bad, although I do prefer the Japanese track. I watch them in English when I'm feeling lazy and not wanting to read subtitles, and to get a different perspective on the script. Venus Wars follows a group of kids, a group of young people that are caught up in a civil war on Venus. It's very political. The score is done by Joe Hisaishi, and it's phenomenal. The script is poignant. It has great bits of action, but it really makes you feel and makes you think about the effect that war has on the everyday citizens, in particular the youth. And I really, really love this movie, guys. One of my favorite anime films of all time, and if you haven't seen this and are a fan of action, sci-fi, or animation, you owe it to yourself to check out Venus Wars. It's a wonderful anime. Venus Wars from '89, obviously. My number 9 is one of my favorite Van Damme films of all time. In fact, I think it's numero dos, right behind Hard Target and right ahead of Bloodsport, which is controversial. So I'm curious to know what you guys think about this pick here. That is Kickboxer. Jean-Claude Van Damme in Kickboxer. This is a straight-up action film from '89 that doesn't have much of a plot, but it's all about the ass-kicking protagonist, our hero, Jean-Claude Van Damme, in this movie. In the very beginning, he's along with his brother in Thailand, I think it is, at a fighting championship. The fighter, this very scary-looking individual who is not on the cover or on the... Well, he is on the back there. I always forget his name. Tong Po. That's his name. I always forget Tong Po. And he's a scary, imposing son of a bitch that doesn't say anything. He just snarls and wants to fuck you up. And so in the beginning, he paralyzes Jean-Claude Van Damme's brother in a fight, and Jean-Claude Van Damme vows to avenge his brother. And so he goes through rigorous training in one of the best training sequences of the 80s. Definitely one of the best in any Jean-Claude film. It's very 70s, very late 60s, early 70s Shaw Brothers, and I love it. I think this has better choreography, fight choreography, and action scenes than Bloodsport. I really do. I think they're a little bit better done than they are in Bloodsport. I love Bloodsport. Don't get me wrong. I adore the film. But I think the action choreography and the way it's shot is a little tighter in this movie. My 9th favorite film from 1989, that is Kickboxer with motherfucking Van Damme. My number 8 is such a special and f***ed up movie. I love it. Brian Yuzna makes another appearance on this list, and that is Society. It's all about fitting in. This movie has one of the strangest climaxes in any film that I have ever seen. If you know the movie, you know what I'm talking about. Screaming Mad George's prosthetic makeup effects in this film are some of the most grotesque, imaginative, disgusting, vile, revolting things that I have ever seen on celluloid. And boy, is it glorious. I love this movie. I love the slow and steady build-up. I love the slow burn of it all. I love any story that follows a kid that sort of feels like he's out of his element. This in particular is about a kid, I believe his name is Billy, and he feels like the odd one out in this very affluent, like Beverly Hills sort of town where the rich feed on the poor, and he just, that's just not him, you know, that's not who he is in his bones. He learns that something strange is going on, and he vows to figure out what the hell's going on, and I can guarantee you will never figure out exactly what is happening. The last 20 minutes is disgusting and awesome. Check out my number 8 of '89, Society. Alright, my number 7 is another film I'm very fond of and very nostalgic for. In fact, all of these movies I'm nostalgic for, saw them all as a kid, and that is Batman, the original from 1989, directed by Tim Burton. This is where we get Michael Keaton, who I still think is one of the best to put on the suit in a live-action movie. I like him better than Bale. He's just got so much more character, so much more to him. Like the scene where he's freaking out, "You wanna get nuts?" Like, stuff like that. You see the crazy side of Bruce Wayne, of Batman, And yeah, you see that in Christian Bale, but it's more of like an American Psycho sort of thing going on. In this, you actually see how human Bruce Wayne is and how human Batman is. It's got a remarkable performance that unfortunately nobody really talks about anymore because of how good of a job Heath Ledger did. Jack Nicholson as the Joker, very comic book-like, definitely doing the Cesar Romero sort of thing with his own Jack Nicholson spin on it. We get the origin story of the Joker in this, where he falls into a vat of ooze, of acid, whatever, and it makes his skin bleached and gives him his appearance. So all of that in less than 2 hours, and man, is it a great movie. The action set pieces are fantastic. The Batmobile looks badass. And what really sets this one apart is the set design, the production design, the imagination that Tim Burton infuses into it. It feels like a comic book. It looks like a comic book. Gotham has never looked so good, in my opinion. It's foggy. It's smoggy, I should say. The towering buildings, the lights, always nighttime, right? And just such a great comic book movie. Batman from 1989 is my number 7. Oh, my number 6. This is the most nostalgic film on the list, guys, and it is my number 6. I recognize it's not the best film on this list, but nostalgia bumps this one up quite a bit, and that is The Wizard. I'm going to do a full review on this one day, maybe a riff review, and really dig into why I love this film so much and how much it did for me as a child when kids at school weren't really talking about video games. It was sort of taboo. This movie comes along and makes video games cool. Granted, I saw this in the early 90s. It came out in 89, but I saw it when I was like 4 or 5. To see Super Mario Brothers playing on the screen, in this case, my old CRT, to see people playing video games, to see behind the scenes at the Nintendo Championships, all of that was a dream come true as a kid. Granted, as an adult, I do recognize that all of that, it's basically a big 90-minute commercial for Nintendo. Yeah, there's a lot of product placement and advertising. They'll show Double Dragon, for example, and and things like that. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Just seeing those games that I was playing as a kid in a movie blew my f***ing mind. You know what I mean? And The Wizard, it is basically Rain Man for kids. So it follows an autistic boy who wants to get to California to play in the Nintendo World Championships. He's a video game wizard. He scores like 50,000 on Double Dragon in the first level, which is impossible to do. It's such a fun movie. Fred Savage, Christian Slater, Beau Bridges. Such a wonderful movie. And the girl, I always forget her name, but she went on to have Jenny Lewis. She has a band now. She's a musician. I am so nostalgic for this film, so fond of it. I watch it once a year at least just to rekindle those memories. It is my number 6. I could go on and on and on and on, and I won't. It is The Wizard. My number 5 is a film that blew my mind out of the water so much when I first watched it. I had to watch it again. That is Tetsuo, the Iron Man. My favorite Iron Man film of all time is Tetsuo, the Iron Man. This is a briskly paced, it's remarkably paced, honestly. It's like 60 minutes long, 65 minutes long, something like that. And it moves at a breakneck pace, literally what the is going on? It's a crazy black and white, cyberpunk, steampunk sort of a story. It's so hard to describe. It's chaos on film. It follows this dude who starts becoming this iron person with iron rebars coming out of his neck and turning into a ball of iron. And this film has so much imagination, creative camera tricks and camera angles and stop motion. The effects are phenomenal. I'm so glad they shot this in black and white because it lends to it, just the cyberpunk nature of it. This film is cyberpunk as hell, and it is crazy as hell. It doesn't have much of a plot, but the plot, when you have this much imagination and creativity, it is my number 5, Tetsuo, the Iron Man. Number 4 is a film I saw when I was way too young, maybe 13, something like that, when I started getting into Hong Kong cinema. 13, 14 years old, I watched Hard Boiled, and then I watched The Killer with Cho Yun-fat. This is a John Woo film, one of his most popular. I do prefer Hard Boiled, but this one is a damn close second. It follows Chow Yun-fat, who wants to get out of the hitman business, so he takes on one last job. Of course, his bosses double-cross him. He teams up with a cop and fucking goes crazy murdering people with the most slick, slow-motion gun fu that you will ever see on film, besides in other John Woo films, of course. Without John Woo, without The Killer, without Hard Boiled, we don't have things like John Wick, and I love The Killer. I love it so much. The finale is both poignant and just action-packed to the brim. It takes place in a church where things are flying all over the place. Doves are flying, explosions of paper and boxes. You know John Woo. It's all slow motion. It's all gun fu. It's all fantastic. That is The Killer. Getting into some heavy, heavy hitters here, guys. My number 3 of all time is another film I'm so nostalgic for. Back to the Future 2. Is it as good as Back to the Future? No, but I think it's damn close. 3 I love as well, but it is my third favorite of the trilogy. Hopefully a trilogy that will never be remade or touched. I believe that Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis have it in their contract that nobody can remake this movie, which more people should do. Blew my mind as a kid. I watched the first one, absolutely loved it. I don't want to say that 2 replays a lot of the activities of the first film, but it sort of does. It makes you look at certain situations and scenarios from a different angle, literally. And the way that the first 2 films, I really feel like they are hand in hand. Without one, there isn't the other. And they just complement each other so remarkably well. And that's why the third one, yeah, it does connect, of course, to all 3 films. But it feels more removed. This one goes back to the 50s. It goes into the future a little bit. The first scene where they get into the future is one that I loved as a kid with the hoverboards. Those boards don't work on water. You know, Biff, the giant Jaws thing coming at the screen, and oh man, as a kid, it just lit my mind on fire. I wanted that jacket, still want that jacket that Marty McFly has that dries itself, still want those kicks too. Badass as hell. I love Back to the Future 2. Such a brilliant movie by Zemeckis. When Zemeckis is on, man, he is on. Back to the Future 1, 2, and 3, some of the best movies of all time. But 2 came out in '89, and it is my number 3. Alright, another heavy hitter here. My number 2, The Last Crusade. Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade, directed by, you all know who directed this, Spielberg. The Last Crusade is not my favorite Indiana Jones movie, but I think it's the best made. I think it's the tightest script. Technically, it's remarkable. I think everything about the performances, the timing, Harrison Ford has really sunken into the role as Indy in this film, and it's just the most complete Indiana Jones film. Of course, Sean Connery coming in as his father just rounds out the cast remarkably well. We get to see a different side of Indy in this movie, a more childish side. When he's around his father, he really becomes more boyish. It also shows that Indiana Jones isn't perfect, and he's a fallible character that makes mistakes. And his father pulls him out of some situations that he gets into, and I think it really humanizes Indiana Jones as a character. My favorite is still Raiders of the Lost Ark, for many reasons, nostalgia being one of them, and I just think it's one of the best action films of all time, action-adventure films of all time. It's really hard for me to pinpoint what I like about Raiders better, since I do think this film is technically better in almost every aspect, story-wise and everything, but that's not what this video is about. It's about my number 2 film from 1989, that is Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Alright, for my number 1, I should have a box of tissues nearby, because this film makes me cry every single time I watch it. I cry in a lot of films that I shouldn't even cry in, like action movies, but I get emotionally moved quite a bit with film. And every time I watch this, it gets me more and more. It's a film that I'm so connected to from when I was a child. It's a film that really sparked my imagination. The characters, the world that they inhabit, the science fiction elements, the comedy, everything about it, I absolutely love. I think it's perfect. And of course, we're getting a sequel soon, probably next year in 2020. My number 1 favorite film from 1989, one of my favorite films of all time. It's in my top 15 or 20. That is Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. This is the Shout Select that has both films, and I love both films. 2 is great as well. and I hope the third one is great, Face the Music. But the original, nothing will ever top. Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure is such an important film. It's such an uplifting movie with a positive message, a simple yet very impactful message for me of be excellent to one another. Be excellent to one another. That's what this movie is all about. It's also about two stoners who never smoke weed, or it's never alluded to that they're stoners, but it sort of is a stoner comedy kind of movie with Bill and Ted who are late for their project. They have no idea. They're slackers at school. They need to do a history project, and fate does them a favor and supplies them with this phone booth that George Carlin pilots. George Carlin's fantastic in this. And in the phone booth, once you're in, you could go to any time period. And in this case, Bill and Ted use it to go to all these different time periods, which is one of the aspects of the film that, as a child, I just absolutely loved. It still intrigues me to this day. It still excites me to this day when they get in that thing and travel to different times. And it's about them going back and basically kidnapping historical figures like Beef Oven, Socrates, as they call them in the movie, Joan of Arc, and all of these historical figures, kidnapping them, bringing them back so that they could present their history project with the actual historical figures. That is the story of this movie, but this movie has so much fucking heart. I'm so connected to this. I grew up watching this incessantly, both films, but this is the one I came back to time and time again. Wild Stallions! I have a Wild Stallions shirt. I will be wearing that to the premiere of Bill and Ted 3 Face the Music. I love Bill and Ted so much. It makes me emotional just thinking about the movie. And like I said, that message of just be excellent to each other. The scene where they go to the future and they don't really know that they're the reason why the future is as peaceful as it is, and that music is playing, and the leaders of that world are doing the Wild Stallions sign. I have goosebumps. It's such a wonderful movie with a wonderful message. That is Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Just be excellent to one another.
Excellent!
I just want to thank you for checking out my top 10 films from 1989. A great year in cinema. There are a lot that just didn't make the cut. A lot of films that I really do enjoy. Maybe I'll do a second one of these somewhere down the road if you guys enjoy it. If you did enjoy it, feel free to give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more videos like it and you're new to the channel, feel free to hit the subscribe button as well as the little bell for notifications. I'd love to know what your top 10 movies from 1989 are, so feel free to list those in the comments below. I'd love to get a conversation going as per usual. Anyway, guys, I will see you next time. Bored Cyborg out.